Welcome everyone, it's Simon here. Just give it a couple of minutes so we'll start on the hour. But hopefully, if anyone's got any problems, just reach out. But we will start in about 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, so welcome everyone. We've just topped over 6 o'clock and 300 people have joined us live. So welcome to the December 2018 Festive Virtual Healthcare Tableau User Group. So you've got 3 presentations for the next hour, and then we've got some time for Q&A. So it's scheduled to run between for the next hour and a half. That's fairly flexible depending on how many questions we get. So just on behalf of Nicole and myself, who help run the Virtual Healthcare User Group, welcome. Thank you for joining us. As always, thank you as well to everyone that's participated over the year. And we hope you will enjoy the next hour. And just before I pass over to Nicole to introduce our speakers today, a very special thank you to 2 people. Jordan and Rasta are the people behind the Tableau user groups in Tableau, and it's needless to say this couldn't happen without them. So the amount of work that they do to enable us to host these virtually, a massive thank you to them both, and we wish you a really happy Christmas. So over to Nicole to introduce our speakers. Nicole, you might be on mute if you're trying to speak.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Okay. I apologize. So I'm going to be introducing Bill Hill and Braxton Lagerman. Both work at Evangelical Community Hospitals. They'll be presenting some information about how they used Alteryx and Tableau to display hourly rounding information for a quality initiative. Bill Hale is a data architect, database administrator, and Tableau server administrator in the decision support department. Previously, has worked within information technology in various industries as a system administrator, integration analyst, and program analyst for the past 28 years after receiving his degree in computer science and business systems from Pennsylvania College of Technology. Recently, Bill was introduced to Alteryx Designer as part of the Tableau adoption at Evangelical Community Hospital, which has allowed him to rediscover his passion for all things data. Braxton Lagerman is a business intelligence developer who has worked in the healthcare industry for the past 8 years. He received his bachelor's degree in computer science from Pennsylvania College of Technology. Braxton loves to work with data to develop intriguing and insightful dashboards using Tableau. He has been using Tableau for the past few years for many quality and revenue-related initiatives at the hospital. After Braxton and Bill, Jeff Crispman, data analyst, database administrator, and lead Tableau developer in the Clinical Quality and Safety Performance Improvement Office at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics, will be presenting his case for showing Tableau dashboards related to quality metrics. He has previously worked as a quality improvement coach at UIHC for his statewide integrated health home initiative and a problem solver at Epic. He received his Master's of Science in Industrial and Operations Engineering from the University of Michigan. Jeff loves data and strives to use analysis and automation to help people be more creative. And last but not least, Simon will be presenting. Simon is currently a director of JLL's BI Center of Excellence for their HSBC account. Prior to working for JLL, Simon led the Healthcare Informatics Department in the UK for over 10 years. During that time, Simon implemented Tableau desktop and server, achieving over 15,000 dashboard views a day across a user base of 4,000 server interactors. Outside of work, Simon co-runs SportsViz Sunday and is incredibly proud to be a Tableau ambassador. Simon will be presenting setting the standard of corporate style, using Tableau with an enterprise environment to provide dashboards that are consistent and positive for the user experience. So without further ado, we will turn it over to Simon.
Cool. So just one quick thing before we hand over. We'd really love everyone to get involved and help spread the work and the message of the virtual healthcare user group. So if you are on Twitter, feel free to reach out and use the hashtag HealthTug. And it'd be great to get the conversation happening on social media and to spread the word about all things Tableau and healthcare. So no further ado, over to our first speaker.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Bill Hale. I work with Braxton and Nicole in the Decision Support Department at EVAN. I'm going to let Braxton open up with this because he was part of the team that started this process. I came in when they needed to crunch some data, so I'm going to give it to Braxton for his first slide.
Sure thing. Bill, there we go. Hello, everyone. My name is Braxton Lagerman, and as Bill just mentioned, we sort of teamed it up together here to present and build some data here related to our hourly rounding here at our hospital. We were able to use Alteryx and Tableau and kind of intertwine the two to develop some of this stuff. So just to start and kind of go over a little bit of kind of the why and the business needs for this, our hourly rounding importance and impact. I'm not sure how many other organizations are doing this at their hospital or plan to at some point. I know it's becoming more and more popular as some quality initiatives related to this kind of stuff. So hopefully we're able to help some of you in discussing some of our challenges and limitations in terms to some of this stuff. So with that being said, many of the key areas here that we kind of needed to address with this was patient satisfaction. So that's really a really important one when it comes to this kind of stuff. Because if you think about it from that perspective, you know, you can influence both your hospital ratings and your reimbursement. And while doing so, we're also improving our patient care. But you know, with sort of what goes along with that is, you know, to help anticipate needs or address patient needs, prevent patient falls, and other things that, you know, kind of tie into that are, you know, do the patients have everything they need? Are their belongings in reach? Was their pain addressed? And by doing that on an hourly basis, it keeps them more involved in their care and to, you know, address their needs and get a better understanding of what they have going on. Also with that, patient safety, you know, by visiting with them each hour, nurses are able to keep a close eye on the patient and to ensure patient safety. So there's many more things that go along with that, but those are some of the key areas that we wanted to address with doing this project. And so there you go, Bill. If you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, and we'll go ahead and dive in.
Okay, everyone. So I'm going to go through this pretty quick due to time, but and you can read this later if you want to look at each bullet. But some of the challenges we faced, we have no data warehouse. Our patient visit data came from our Allscripts database. Our observations came from our Allscripts database. We have labor and delivery information from our Allscripts database. All these are in different areas. And the labor and delivery patients had different rounding requirements, so we needed to track them separately, but also bring them into this workflow. Our surgery data is from a totally disparate system, GE Centricity. Our ER patient data is tracked via MedHost, which is another database. But the one good thing about all of this is that our patients are registered through a single system for the most part, and so we have a common patient number used in all the systems that allows us to join. The output was going to be a final data as published in Tableau data source on the server. The plan then, I mean, I worked with Braxton pretty closely on this, and we kind of did this from scratch. You know, the plan was from each encounter, we wanted to create a separate row to identify each hour the patient was admitted. From that, we wanted to remove all the rows that the patient was in surgery, if any, and then we also needed to pad 2 hours for recovery. So the rounding was not required during that time. We also needed to determine the hours the patient was in the labor and delivery. Since those patients have different observations, we needed to kind of bring them in, but also identify them separately. We wanted to remove rows and hours that the patient was in the ER, if any. A lot of patients come into the hospital through the ER, and so they're admitted to the ER. And the way our systems work, you know, they don't get discharged from the ER and readmitted. So we needed to actually manipulate when they left the ER so that we could determine when rounding should have started for them, which was quite a challenge. We padded 2 hours to the admit date for all the other IP visits prior to rounding. I call that setup. I don't know what the nurses actually call it, but you know, they're not required to do the rounding, you know, prior to those 2 hours. We needed to query the observations for all the inpatients. We needed to query the required observations for all the labor and delivery patients. And then we wanted to create separate observation flags for every hour that they were here and that they required rounding. And then we wanted to populate that with a true or false. Simply, yes, they did this, no, they didn't. And then, of course, we schedule a daily refresh and write the published data source to Tableau. Okay, so then so here's where Alteryx came in. Alteryx, and I'm going to go through this pretty quick. The Alteryx does allow for multiple connections to these data sources, which would take care of that problem. Once the data is pulled into Alteryx, it can be manipulated any way you need to do it. You can route the results to many different places multiple times. The main Alteryx tool for this challenge that we ended up using was called the Generate Rows tool, which allowed for creation of a row for every hour of admission, surgery, and labor and delivery based on the admit start and admit stop. So you can tell that it's more of a, think of it as a pivot from, you know, kind of like from columns to rows. The join and union tools were used extensively for obvious reasons with the many different data sources. We used the publish to Tableau server macro tool that's included with Alteryx. And then we scheduled the workflow to run each AM. The Generate Rows tool, real quick, I just wanted to go over it. Patient visit row with admit start dates, they easily become separate rows. Same with the patient surgery. And then we can use those results to find out if observations were met during that time. Just in a simple snapshot here of what it might look like. You can see the first row up here has the admit date time, discharge date time. Then when we run it through the tool, we truncate the minutes. We don't need the minutes. So now we have an admit hour, discharge hour. Since we didn't need the first 2 hours, you can see where our first observation date time required would have been 7, and then 8, and then 9, and then 10, and so on. Obviously, the black mark over here is this was live data, so I wanted to hide the encounter number. And then after joining that to the observations and adding the true or false fields, I couldn't fit them all in here, but you can kind of see what happens. So during this observation hour, 7 a.m., you can see where we just marked, you know, pain assessment, position, potty, alarm, within reach, and the list goes on and on and on. You'll see where there's a gap between 8 and 1400. That was where the patient was in surgery and rounding was not required. So we removed those rows. They were removed automatically. For those that have not seen Alteryx, I know you can't read the screen. I'm going to jump over quick to my Alteryx and just kind of show you the designer. Hopefully everyone can see it. I'm like I said, there's a lot on this. It's really busy. I just want to go through it quick and give you an idea of how we did this. So as you can recall, there was surgery data, and the surgery data not for everyone, but a lot of these inpatient encounters would have a surgery. So this section up here at the top, that's where I pull in the surgery information. This is the input right here. All of these are the same. The input is set up as a SQL Connect, and we have a query in there. Returns the results. Runs through a lot of tools here. Don't get alarmed by all that. That's just a lot of ETL work, transforming, getting the data clean, getting it the way we want it. The next step down, we read all of the observations for all of the encounters. Okay, we just read it all in every morning. We read every observation in and accumulate a list. Okay, one set of that data goes, follow the arrows, goes this way. The other set drops down to OB, because to know if a patient is in OB, that's actually a result as well. That's an observation, and that observation was, as you can kind of see it here, but it's an observation that says that we had to look for, called as delivery. So then we did more work with those. If you scroll down a little further, you'll see right here where I query just the encounter information. So these are all the encounters that qualified for what we wanted to pull in. Basically, patient encounter, admit date, discharge date, and any other information we needed. Okay, that data then was joined right here. If you can read the yellow, if not, I'll read it to you. Join all encounters with modified OB labor and delivery encounters based on when the patient left the labor and delivery. If no labor and delivery, then use admit date. The bottom line was we were manipulating the data from our encounter and basically saying, if they were in labor and delivery, you give me the date they left the labor and delivery. They're going to be their new admit date for the purpose of calculating rows for required observations. And lastly, but not least, down at the bottom, you'll see where I'm pulling in the ER information. And that's basically to know if they came in through the ER, that lets us know when they left the ER. And then that, if you follow over here, that gets joined with the results I just talked about, and then gets sent up to this block up here where we determine the admit date time, because if a patient was, if they came through the ER, we wanted to start at that point they left the ER. So we're doing a little manipulation there. Continuing through, and I know I'm kind of, looks like I'm going out of order, but I'm really not. Doing some work here, doing some formula work, and then right here's the tool
Bill, I think your audio might have cut out, or you might have froze. Nicole, can you hear anything?
Simon, did you hear me?
I'm back.
Oh, cool. Thanks,
Okay.
Bill.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. It just went black on me. So, can you guys still see the screen?
Yeah, we can.
All right. Sorry about that. I don't know how far where I got cut off at. I was going through the prep the encounter data and generate rows for each hour of admission. The tool I was speaking of with the generate rows right here was where we took each hour, based on some formula work here. You basically say from the admit date to the start to the discharge date, give me a separate row in the table in the results. And then those results are sent back up through, joined with our surgery data. As you can see right here where my mouse is, we join with the surgery data, but all we're doing there is flagging whether that encounter was actually a surgery encounter or not. At this point, we're not removing anything. The next step, as you can see up here, is another generate rows. That's where we take, when we generate a row for each hour the patient was in surgery. We do another join with our encounter data, and we only take the right side. So basically what we're doing with this tool is we're saying, I don't want any of the data that matches the surgery data. If they match, if there's an hour of surgery for an hour of encounter, I don't want them included in my results, because we don't require rounding for them. And that's why we do it this way here. And the rest, really, at that point, we're just kind of joining our results all together. We're going through right here with the formula tool, and we're checking whether these observations were done or not. Doing some summarization, populating some flags, doing a final join, and we're actually writing it to Tableau. And this whole workflow, I know that's really fast, especially for anyone that hasn't seen Alteryx before. But the amazing thing about it is you can do so much with all these tools, and I tend to use many tools instead of trying to combine things in one tool. That way, it's kind of self-documenting. We schedule this workflow to run every morning, and it takes about an hour to run. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Braxton, and hopefully I gave him some time.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Bill. I will go ahead and share my screen now. Okay, so with that, all that being said, with Alteryx, as you can see, there was quite a few challenges and whatnot that we had to work through. And at the beginning of this project, we sort of did it in intervals. You know, we would tackle one thing, and then the next thing would pop up. Hey, we have patients who are in surgery that we need to acquire for. Patients, you know, here for delivering babies. You know, we have to look at them a little bit differently. So that's why we thought this would be a good project to kind of present here at our healthcare user group, to go through, you know, the challenges and whatnot with, you know, having Alteryx and Tableau to be able to help us get to where we are today. So now I'll go ahead and hop into our Tableau presentation. We have a few workbooks that a few dashboards that we look at in terms of our hourly rounding compliance. The first dashboard here that we're looking at is kind of what we'll call our summary. This is year to date through November. So at the top here, we have it broken out by shifts to help with, you know, break it out for nursing. In our first chart here, we're looking at the all shifts. And you can see, as Bill had said in the Alteryx portion of this, each record in our data set here, it represents a patient hour. So when you see the number of records, the number of patient hours, that's essentially what that means. How many eligible hours are available for each patient, you know, that we should be looking for our patient checks in regards to hourly rounding. And then we broke it out for each different shift, 7 a.m. to 3, 3 to 11, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. So we can kind of see it amongst the different shifts. We also have trending down here at the bottom, so we can see how we're doing over time. For example, another good way for this is, you know, to point out outliers. For example, here, looks like on September 4th, you know, we had a little bit of a drop in our percentage. And, you know, we wanted to look into what happened there, what did we do wrong? And when we did, that was actually, we had a system downtime. So another good thing to be able to point out flaws or anything like that, you know, what and why went wrong in terms of our compliance rate for that day. So again, this is just a high-level overview of our hourly rounding compliance. And now I will go ahead and hop over to our next dashboard. So this dashboard is looking at our hourly rounding compliance by day, and the benefits of this dashboard is what it is. It breaks it out by the hour and the day, and the reason for that is, especially in regards to what we just looked at in the last slide, of where we were looking at by shifts. When we have shift changes, we noticed that our rates were dropping a little bit. So that's kind of what was going on here. You know, as you notice here at the 23-hour, our rates are a little bit lower than what we would expect at other hours, and that is a shift change. So again, the benefits of this dashboard is really looking at it by hour and by day to see where we have some opportunities for improvement. Down here at the bottom, you can also see our trends over time. And, you know, if we look back in January, we were all the way down around the 70 percentage mark. And in more recent months, we're almost up to the 90 percentage area. So we definitely seen some improvements, and with the help of Alteryx and Tableau, we're kind of able to monitor that over time and address the needs as we go. I will go ahead and go to the next one now. So this dashboard, we have this one that we'll call hourly rounding by patient. And this dashboard, we kind of use this more of like a validation tool to see where we are and how we're doing, again, at the patient level. For example, every so often we'll get together as a group and kind of go through this and see if we can find any areas for improvement or something we may have missed. And for example, we talked about some of our challenges One being like patients in surgery. When we first went live with this, we weren't necessarily accounting for the time the patients were in surgery. So when we'd look at someone and say, hey, why wasn't rounding done? Oh, well, that's because they were in surgery. You know, round or patient checks are not needed during that time. So this was a good tool to help us understand our data a little bit better and to really find the outliers. And for example, you know, if we look at some of these down here, like why is their rate so low? So when you hover over it, you get a little bit more information about each encounter. And with that, this one does have a drill down. So for example, if I wanted to see this patient here, it looks like they had about 80% compliant for their rounding. I will go ahead and view the encounter details for this patient. And then here, again, it gives you a brief overview of their percentage, so a little more information about the encounter. And normally right here is where their encounter number would show up. So the user can then look into our core system to see, you know, a little bit more information about it, why rounding may or may not have been missed. Because then over here, you see, we do have an alert that points out the hours that were missed. And as Bill had talked about, each observation hour is shown here. So then it shows, was the rounding done, yes or no? And the alerts will indicate whether or not it was done or not. So I'll go ahead and go back again to our previous dashboard. Okay, and then we also have an hourly rounding compliance dashboard. This dashboard also breaks it out by the location of the patient, and that can be shown up here at the top. There's only one filter in this dashboard. We're looking at the last 12 months currently, and in the top left section, we have, again, like I said, the discharge location. So as you hover over, you can see what the percentage is for each location, and this is also filterable. So when I click, for example, on medical, it will then filter the data to only show us the medical. And as you can see, they do a pretty good job there. I do not see any alerts showing. As you scroll down, if again, the patient number is blinded, but each row you're looking at here does represent one encounter. So this patient here would have fell under our threshold for the rounding. So that's why they are alerted. We can then do further analysis and determine why or what may have happened if need be. Any of this is sortable as well. So if we wanted to see all of the ones that did not meet our rounding goal, they will then show here as well. The reason why we had the length of stay showing as well is because, for example, if you have a patient that's been here many days and their rounding was not done as we would expect, that can really, you know, impact our rates. So that's a good indicator to look at and determine, you know, how often is rounding being completed. And again, up here we have another trending section. So you can kind of see if we go back to January, we are trending up a little bit. So we want to get to around the 90% mark. So we are on our way there. And again, hopefully, you know, with going through all this, we're able to help some other organizations out there, because it was a bit of a challenge trying to go through all of this and get it to where we are today. And also we do have a definitions page within this workbook. And the reason why I want to show this is just to show some of the different patient checks. This may be different pertaining to each hospital, but again, as Bill sort of pointed out, we have different patient checks depending on the patient, whether it's, you know, a normal inpatient, for example, versus an obstetric patient. They will have different patient checks that they need to do. And these are also some of the things we talked about in regard to like the patient satisfaction thing. You know, when you're checking in on the patient every hour, it makes them feel a little more comfortable. And if they do have any, you know, things that they need or don't have, you know, nursing can address that with them during that time. So that is all that we have. I do believe we do have time for a Q&A session if anyone does have any questions. And Bill and I will be sharing our contact information. So if anybody does have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out, and we'd be happy to help you with that.
Thank you so much, Braxton and Bill. We actually have to hold the Q&A until the end. We're going to switch over and allow Jeff Kritzman to go ahead and present about the quality metrics that he does for the University of Iowa. We'll turn it over to you, Jeff. Thank you. I can see your screen. Can you put it in presentation mode, please? Wonderful. Thank you. Jeff, if you're talking, can you unmute yourself?
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. As Nicole mentioned, my name is Jeff Kritzman, and today I'm going to talk about my organization's efforts to take our infection prevention program to the next level by using Tableau and data visualization. So I work at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics, or UIHC. We are a comprehensive academic medical center located in Iowa City, Iowa. We currently have 811 active inpatient beds, including our somewhat recently opened children's hospital. I'm actually pretty sure this number has changed since I made this slide, but that's kind of how it goes around here. Our emergency room has about 60,000 patient visits every year, and that keeps growing. We have more than 36,000 inpatient visits every year, and actually more than 1 million outpatient visits every year. Including our outreach centers throughout the state, we have more than 200 clinics throughout Iowa. It is worth mentioning quickly that UIHC is the only tertiary care hospital in the state of Iowa, so we get a lot of high acuity patients from all across the state. Basically, anyone in Iowa who reaches a certain level of care comes to us, which means our doctors are not unusual in that they always say, our patients are sicker. More on this later on when we talk about risk standardization. So a quick word about myself. I started my healthcare journey coming straight out of undergrad and working at Epic for a couple years. Learned a lot about healthcare, coding, data, databases, various troubleshooting technical techniques. I then foolishly tried to get out of healthcare by going back to grad school in industrial and operations engineering at the University of Michigan. I ended up working with a wonderful advisor who rekindled my love for healthcare. We worked together on mathematical models to optimally allocate patient arrivals to ICUs and step-down units, among other things. And then using some of that probability and lean thinking, I came to UIHC as a quality improvement coach working with mental health agencies throughout the state as part of a population health program for Medicaid. This brings us to present, where I work in quality and safety for central administration at UIHC. Our main pillars in this department are epidemiology and infection prevention, antimicrobial stewardship, clinical quality, and patient safety. And I do work extensively with each of these areas, but today I'm just talking about epidemiology and infection prevention. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the rest of my team. It's definitely more than a one-person effort. We have a great team here in quality and safety who really work together to make things happen. In addition to a dedicated core of IT professionals, we have infection preventionists and quality improvement engineers who work with care providers and other staff throughout the hospital system to improve outcomes, putting our data to use. So before we get too far in, it might be good to do a super quick primer on infection prevention. Forgive me if this is a bit basic, but I know not everyone deals with quality and safety on a daily basis. So today I'm going to be talking about hospital-acquired infections, or HAIs. The idea being, if you go to the hospital, you should get better and not sicker. So these are infections that you pick up while you're at the hospital, which is a big deal because they have pretty high mortality rates. Plus, they're associated with excess cost that isn't reimbursed, and the hospital's overall compensation is tied to the HAI rates in the US. HAIs come in many flavors, but the main types that we focus on are catheter-associated urinary tract infections, or CAUTIs, central line-associated bloodstream infections, or CLABSIs, Clostridium difficile, or C. diff, and surgical site infections, or SSIs. I'm going to be talking actually just about SSIs today, because this is still a pretty broad realm. Okay, one last item before we hop into a live demo in Tableau. We do most of our HAI reporting based on data that we get from NHSN, which is the CDC's web portal, which is the Center for Disease Control. And we do this for a couple of reasons. First off, they do risk adjustment, and we use that to benchmark our numbers. Secondly, we're already required to submit this data to the government via NHSN. And so pulling it back out and using it helps us validate our data much more closely. We're able to find errors much more quickly and more consistently this way. So we actually pull the raw data extracts from NHSN via flat files or CSVs and merge and manipulate them in Tableau. We've been able to completely remove any manual manipulation of the data, aside from moving the files and actually refreshing the extract in Tableau, which is a huge improvement to our process. And then we supplement our NHSN data with data from EPIC, our EHR. For instance, for C. diff, we pull in whether or not the lab test was toxin positive. We pull that from EPIC, but we also pull a lot of other data from EPIC that might be not directly related to the HAIs. So we use a direct connection to the underlying Clarity database, which is a nightly copy of EPIC's data via SQL. And then once we create our data sources and dashboards in Tableau Desktop, we publish them to Tableau Server, where users can access the various reports, and we have scheduled refreshes that help keep the data up to date, especially for these EPIC queries. Okay, let's pop over to Tableau. Okay, first we're going to look at surgical site infections by type of procedure. Within SSIs, we further categorize things by type of procedure, for instance, hysterectomy, colon surgery, breast surgery, and so on. So we've got a small multiple here showing number of infections by quarter for each procedure. And you know, this is nice. You can start to see some trends and how the different procedures compare and how we're doing over time. We also have a text box here with information on dates. And so this is important. Normally I try to put an actual date there, but it's a little complicated with SSIs because, for instance, hysterectomy is 30-day surveillance, but CABG is 90-day surveillance, which basically means there's different amounts of data lag. So it's important to distinguish them. And we also have in here for the latest quarter, whether provisional results. And this is somewhat modified and de-identified and faked data source, so it's a little old, but you can see at this point we had provisional data for middle of 2018. And so seeing as this is a Tableau talk, here's a quick note on a cool technical trip that I picked up from Michele Tessari way back at TC16. So I'm actually able to get all of these procedures into one graph as a small multiple by using these column and row calculations. And so if we come in here, maybe zoom in a little bit, basically just using a case statement and looking at the procedure type name and then assigning it a hard-coded column and row value. This is just the column calculation. And then I use those variables on my column and row shelves, and that kind of puts the procedures into the right place where I wanted them to be. And it's voila, quick and relatively painless small multiple. So Michele actually did this based on an index, which is probably even cooler. But seeing as I have a relatively small number of procedure types, I opted to hard code it. Plus, this lets me choose arbitrary orderings, which make clinically logical sense, even if there's not a data reason to do it. For instance, abdominal hysterectomy and colon surgery are the two procedures that are used for CMS star rating, and so they should always be first. And plus, it helps them stay in a consistent order unless I purposefully change the order, which helps the dashboard stay more comprehensible to end users, because it isn't uncommon that we actually start reporting a new procedure type as resources become available. So then I dual axised a dummy line in here where just made it completely transparent and then did a label on the start of the line for the surgery type name, just to give myself a nice little label here in the small multiple. And that's, you know, a fairly nice and elegant solution considering that we add procedures every so often. And so yeah, this view is great for getting a sense of the raw numbers of infections that are happening across the hospital, which our epidemiologist loves. But it doesn't really account for the volume of surgeries done. So some types of surgeries are done much more frequently than others, and they shouldn't necessarily be punished for having more infections if it's not out of proportion. So with that in mind, let's look at the next tab, which shows the SSI rate. So in a lot of ways, it's very similar to the number. Oops. But you know, if you look at CABG, this is much more of an issue than it would appear to be here. And so really that rate helps even out the playing field a little bit and changes the message and narrative. But so you can see on your tooltip the number of infections, the number of procedures, the actual infection rate, and surveillance period. So this view is very popular, especially with administration at our epidemiology and infection prevention group. It's actually the first page of our main SSI dashboard, and we generally direct users to it as a starting point for SSIs. But still, there is more that we can do to even things out. Each type of procedure inherently has a different level of risk for infection. You can imagine that a colon surgery is considerably dirtier and therefore riskier than a hip replacement or hysterectomy. To account for this difference, we use NHSN's risk standardization metric, the standardized infection ratio, or SIR, which you can see here. So basically, NHSN does a massive regression to determine the number of predicted or expected infections, and then you can divide your observed infections by your predicted infections to get an O to E ratio, namely your SIR. So if your SIR is over 1, you had more infections than expected, which is not good. But if your SIR is under 1, on the other hand, great job. So looking at the trends here, you can actually see something different where, colon surgeries are actually doing pretty well. Whereas if we look back at number or rate, they're our worst offender. But again, as it's an inherently riskier surgery type, they're looking okay here once we risk standardize. An interesting aspect of the SIR is that it requires a certain size denominator to work properly. If you don't have at least 1.0 predicted infections, then the SIR is invalid. So this makes sense when you think about it, because if you had 0.1 predicted infections, but you had 1 observed infection, your SIR would be 10. But that probably seems unfair. Maybe you just got unlucky. Plus, this will skew the graph for everything else. Looking here, our worst value is 2.2, which is not good, but if you had a 10, that would look pretty minor. And, it could cause a lot of commotion in the C-suite over something that might not be worth any attention at all. For this reason, we show the SIRs for SSIs on a yearly basis to ensure an adequate denominator. But so as we began pushing out the SIR as a new preferred metric to use, we ran into some issues when we tried to explain it to frontline staff. For people who might not be super technical or data savvy, and who definitely don't have time to dedicate to learning about math, the SIR is a bit of an abstract notion. And so based on these conversations, we developed an additional dashboard which shows observed versus expected infections. And so this is still the same data that the SIR uses, just shown in a slightly different way. And it's a familiar way of displaying data for frontline staff because they're used to seeing performance against a benchmark, which this is. It's also, in many ways, a much more straightforward way of thinking about things, which can be quite beneficial. So again, we have our small multiple with the bars showing in observed infections and the gray lines showing expected infections. And we can show it at the quarterly level, even if there isn't 1.0 predicted infections. We just don't have an SIR, but you can still see and get a qualitative sense of what that might mean. Another reason I like this view is that you can, the reason I like this view is that you can simultaneously see the raw number of infections with also being able to see risk standardization information there. Plus, I got to make a cool living legend, which people really seem to like, and it was fun to make. So once we had this methodology built out, we started thinking about other interesting ways to look at the data. So NHSN actually provides the number of predicted infections for each individual surgery done, taking into account various comorbidities and different conditions of the patient and of the case, such as BMI, age, diabetes, etc. So in other words, we can see what the individual risk is for each individual surgery. And so we can aggregate up however we want. Once we have the data source set up, we can easily create SIRs across any dimension we have. So the first thing we looked at beyond the initial scorecards was to look at SIR by surgeon. So once we had the idea, it was pretty straightforward to make a basic scatter plot showing number of procedures versus SIR, with each dot being a surgeon here. And you can easily see how people are doing and who the outliers are, both in terms of high and low performance. Again, we exclude anyone with less than 1.0 predicted infections to avoid skewing the graph and to maintain fairness. But so if you hover over a surgeon's dot, you can see their trend here with the observed and expected over time over quarters for that particular surgeon. So you see this person maybe had a rough start, but the last year or so they've been doing great. And we can look at this outlier and say, is this a problem still? And maybe we say, okay, well back here they had a terrible quarter, and they've been doing better, but still not great. So that's pretty helpful there. But so we also added in a sorted bar chart here on the left to help interact with the data, showing SIR by procedure type. And so if you click one of the bars, like I'm going to pick on colon surgery here, it actually filters the scatter plot there. And so this only shows surgeries this now shows surgeries that are coded as colon surgeries, and it's still broken out by surgeon and showing the same thing. But you can start to look, if we say, oh, we're doing pretty bad in CABG, we can look and say, oh, okay, well, it's really this person we need to follow up with. And this is proven quite useful, especially for our hospital epidemiologist, because he's been able to use this to identify some of the worst performing surgeons that are really impacting those negative outcomes, and then has worked with them to drastically improve their performance. And it was somewhat of a known issue about these surgeons on the front lines, but by having hard data to support it, these surgeons were much more receptive to input like that. So one other thing we've started using is another metric called the CAD, which stands for cumulative attributable difference. And so this is sort of a cousin to the SIR. So whereas the SIR is the ratio between observed and expected infections, the CAD is the difference. And as it is largely an operational metric, we generally truncate the CAD at 0 and only show categories with a positive CAD. This lets us quickly see where the most excess infections are happening. And you can see there's only one surgery. This shows fiscal year 2018. There's only one surgery that had an excess of infections, even though when you look at the SIR, some had quarters that were over. I guess this is by fiscal year, but it's still a nice way to look at it because you can break it out by division, by provider, because even though colon surgery might be doing great, different divisions do colon surgeries, and so maybe one division's doing awesome and one division's doing not good, and so it balances out to pretty good. So this lets you look into that and by provider. And so while the SIR provides a powerful kind of nuanced way to look at infections based on risk, the CAD is more of a brute force hammer, which can be operationally quite useful. And so we use it to help allocate our limited infection prevention resources and address places where there are just too many infections. Whereas the SIR is great for comparing relative performance, the CAD is better suited for more practical questions, such as, if I have $100,000 to spend on infection prevention, where should I spend that money? And so this dashboard itself updates automatically, including which procedures, divisions, and providers are included based on which groups have a positive CAD for the time frame in question. So this is a static, because it's just my example, but in our actual report, we have a live dashboard showing fiscal year to date that is based on the latest data. So something else we've been working on is including more process metrics in our dashboards. And for those who might not be familiar with this terminology, basically there are outcome metrics and process metrics. Outcome metrics are what you care about at the end of the day, your main thing that you're being measured on. In this case, your infection rate or SIR. Process metrics, on the other hand, measure the things that you can do to improve your outcome metric performance. So in this case, we've identified that peri-op patient temperature, pre-op skin preparation, antibiotic dosing and redosing, and glucose levels are all things that impact SSIs. And so these are our process metrics that we track so that we can help drive better infection rates. Because improving process metrics is a much clearer way to improve, but also generally drives improvement in those outcome metrics. So in this particular dashboard, We're looking at SSIs, again, with the outcome and process metrics together, which lets you kind of compare things on an equal playing field and lets you pick out trends and what might be impacting performance at various points in time, for better or for worse. It defaults to show the aggregate performance for the procedure types that we report to NHSN. And so you can see the aggregate infection rates and the performance in the various fields. But you can also drill down here. And so, for instance, let's keep picking on colon surgery. Now we can see, just for colon surgery, their infection rate, their SIR. And it is also helpful to know the infections by depth. Because, for instance, CMS, when they do their star rating, excludes superficial infections, which are basically at the skin level. And, you know, the deep or worse than superficial and organ space are the worst. And so even if we have more infections, if we have less organ space and less deep, that's an improvement. But yeah, so this is actually one of our more popular SSI dashboards. While the small multiples are favored by administration, departmental staff like to look more in depth at their own data and generally use this version. Okay, so just one more way to slice the data for now. There's so many ways to slice the data. But so we put together this highlight table to help our infection preventionists really focus in on problem areas and dig into what procedures are struggling or doing well with the various process metrics. And you can see pretty quickly who's doing well. And, you know, oh, right away it's like heart transplant, not doing so great with their glucose tests. What's going on with, you know, abdominal aortic aneurysm repair with initial dosing within an hour? And maybe it's a data issue, but maybe it's a practice issue. And so this really helps guide that. And again, once we had all these data sources set up and had the idea, it was actually pretty straightforward to put it together. You'll notice that there are a lot more procedure types here than what we've been looking at so far. Even though we don't report all of these to NHSN yet, these are the 40 procedure types that NHSN defines. And so we like to use those definitions because NHSN chose these procedure types because they are the most common and most risky types of procedures. So they deem them worth tracking, and that aligns nicely with how we would want to direct our infection prevention efforts. Okay, so back to PowerPoint. All right, a quick shout out to some current and upcoming projects we're working on. Again, this is just talking about infection prevention and epidemiology. The rest of quality safety is a whole other story. So one of the big political hurdles we face is that there are multiple, often conflicting ways to look at SSIs. As an institution, we've chosen to use the NHSN definitions, as this is what the government judges us on. Some surgeons prefer to use a different definition based on NSQIP, which is the National Surgical Quality Improvement Program, which is a registry focusing on surgical performance improvement. And so they have totally different definitions of what qualifies for what types of procedures and a totally different risk adjustment methodology. And it's definitely a valid way of looking at SSIs. You know, I don't want to knock NSQIP. It's actually a lot better than NHSN in a lot of ways, and can agree more closely with how a surgeon might want to define things. But again, it's not how we're measured by the government, and it's not how our reimbursement is determined, which is why we choose to use the NHSN definitions institutionally. But so what we're working on is trying to get these two data sources merged so that we can look at every surgery and say, okay, what's the risk score for SSIs for NHSN? What's the risk score for NSQIP? Was it counted as an infection? What type of procedure? And sort of look at it more apples to apples, and we're all talking the same language. Because it's definitely a thing where people will say, well, our infection rate in NSQIP is this, and that's not what you said. And so just trying to get rid of that argument. Also, we have this huge untapped source of data that records facilities metrics. For instance, OR room temperature is recorded every 10 minutes, and all OR door openings are recorded, and which both obviously impact patient temperature. And so we want to, there are a lot of other types of data in there too, but we want to compare this to our metrics and look at correlations with SSIs and other process metrics. So we're in the process of getting our hands on this data in a more sustainable manner at the moment. We're also working on breaking out SSIs by department. For instance, like I said, colon surgeries can be done by colorectal surgeons or trauma doctors or OB-GYN doctors or other things, and all of these are in different parts of the organization. So if we want to address problem areas, we definitely need to get down to that level of granularity in a more consistent way. So we've only really talked about SSIs today, but we have pretty extensive reporting on the other HAIs as well. So we're just trying to bring more process metrics in because we feel pretty good about our SSI process metrics, but need to be a little better about the rest of the HAIs. And so we use hand hygiene and CHG bathing as great process metrics. And we look at device utilization a little, but need to be more consistent and mindful about how we do that. We're also developing a new metric based on central line site readiness that can help predict CLABSIs. And we've actually done some statistical analysis, and it seems to be actually fairly predictive. But so anyways, thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoy my presentation. And please feel free to reach out. I always love connecting with fellow healthcare Tableau users, especially if you're doing quality and safety work. And so, shameless self-promotion, a lot of this is based on a new blog I've been working on at infectiousdataviz.com. So that and Twitter are great ways to keep up on what we're doing here at Iowa. That'll do it for me. Thanks again, and yeah, back to you, Simon and Nicole.
Thank you,
Thank you
Jeff.
so much, Jeff. We don't have time for Q&A for Jeff, but we'll try to get it at the end of the session. So without further ado, Simon, the floor is yours.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Nicole. So just let me go into our slide deck. So for the last talk today, I'm going to go through how we've approached visualization standards in the organization that I work in, JLL. So hands up now, we are not a healthcare organization, but when Nicole and I were planning the content for today's user group, it felt as though this was quite a generic topic that would hopefully benefit everyone. So who are our visualization standards meant for? So I think it's really easy to fall into the natural position that Viz standards can be quite technical. Some people think they are about a template. Others think they are about specific chart types. Actually, for me, it's all about people. The reason we're doing visualization standards are so that we can improve the user experience of our users, and we can help the analysts to be the best they possibly can be by giving them a template and a framework in Tableau that helps showcase their skills. So yes, it is a technical document and it's a technical process, but actually in reality, as per so much about Tableau, a lot of it is about culture and the way you approach things. So from our point of view, in terms of why they're important, from a user perspective, it's about creating a consistent user experience. When you go onto the websites that are popular, so many websites that are well used across the world are well used because of the fact the user experience is consistent across every single page they've got. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do in Tableau. I'm going to share a couple of examples later, but the kind of things we're trying to do is say when you go onto a Tableau dashboard in our organization, you shouldn't need to guess how to use it. You should be able to know that the filters and the interactions are there. You should instantly know where they're structured. And ultimately, you should be focusing on getting quicker insights as opposed to guessing how to use a dashboard. And I think when I reached out and asked our users for some honest feedback, one of the things that struck me is actually, we're not trying to say all of our dashboards have to have a bar chart or a line chart. I think the only thing we say, joking aside, is probably they don't have a pie chart. I think that's fairly well known in the Tableau community. But actually, if you're giving users a product that is branded, has got a consistent look and feel, it actually gives the end user confidence that what they're using is a high quality product. They may not agree with the data and what the numbers are showing them at times, but the one thing they can't argue with is you've built it wrongly. And from an analyst perspective, what we're trying to do is break the silos. So all the time you've got analysts working individually using different processes, different practices. You lose that ability for analysts to be able to provide feedback to each other and understand how they've worked. So one of the things I'll share lastly in the talk today is about an internal peer review. And that's all about meaning that analysts are giving feedback to each other and we're working as a group. And actually Viz standards can support that because it supports a continuous way of working. They also, I think, encourage continuous improvement. So the analysts are constantly striving to be the best they can be and to learn a new skill. And ultimately, from an analyst point of view, it creates efficiency. If you've got your analysts working consistently and approaching dashboards in the same way, it's really easy to cross-cover. It's really easy to pick up dashboards that were done previously and be able to continuously develop them. So all of that is about creating a positive user experience for your Tableau community, whether it be your users or your analysts. So before I jump in and give you a couple of examples, just the principles behind our Viz standards, we keep it simple. So we don't use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. A Viz standard should be something that is easy to follow and adds value, not something that's complicated and makes your analyst life hell. We also ensure it benefits people, and I've shared a couple of reasons why in the past side, but ultimately it's about benefiting your end users. Everything we do in Tableau isn't there for us as techie geeks, it's there for our customer. So if the Viz standards can help benefit the customer in the way that they interact with data and get insights, then ultimately it's a good thing. We also try and support our analysts to implement it. So some of the concepts, especially in our Viz standards that we've developed over the past few months, are a little bit complex. So it does use containers, it does use padding, and those aren't concepts that are instantly recognizable for every analyst. So actually part of our journey in our Viz standards is also about supporting the analysts to educate them and raise their Tableau skills and their Tableau experience. But ultimately, the last thing for me is the most important thing. We focus on the behaviors. We don't look at this as a technical document. At every stage, we say, why are we doing Viz standards? And ultimately, it's to improve the behaviors of our end users, improve their interactions with Tableau, and maximize the insights that the business gets, so we can maximize decision making. So what do our visualization standards consist of? So we've got guidance. So that's telling the analysts how we would like them to approach tasks. We've got examples that bring that to life. But for me, the biggest thing that we've done, and I'll show it to you in a bit, is on the right-hand side of all of our sections, we've got a dedicated section that picks out community inspiration. So as an example, when we talk about padding or containers, I will reference a number of Tableau blog sites so that when the analyst picks up the Viz standard, if their instant thought is, I'm not quite sure how to do that, we're not leaving them guessing, we're giving them links to the Tableau community, which can help educate and help support them. And then surrounding all of that, there's a template workbook. So actually the analysts, when they first pick up Tableau and they approach doing a dashboard in our organization, have a template dashboard with a lot of the Viz standards already applied, so they don't have to recreate that every single time. So in terms of what our Viz standards consist of, you've got dashboard layout. So that's talking about the concept of kind of eye tracking, keeping white space is good space, and trying to keep things to a minimum. So if you like four charts at most to a dashboard. We also talk about how we'd like to use interactivity, so actions, tooltips, etc. What our color palette is, and that's very much trying to comply with JLL's internal branding, but it's also referencing how we do red, amber, green, and why potentially red, amber, green isn't always the best way of approaching, especially with trend analysis and understanding the impact of metrics. We also talk about formatting, so that's kind of number formatting, axis formatting. And the last thing, and I'd like to say a massive thank you to Andy for this. About 3 months ago, I reached out to Andy Kriebel and said, would he be okay for me to download his Viz vocabulary, put it into JLL colors, and then embed it at the back of our Viz standards so that the analysts had a kind of go-to place where they could understand and reverse engineer all the different chart types that we would encourage them to use. And for Andy to say yes to that has really transformed the way that we use Viz standards and really helped bring it to life. So I'm now going to jump into our Viz standards and just give you a couple of top takeaways from an end user perspective and an analyst perspective. So these are our Viz standards. This is an example template, and it gives you an idea in terms of the branding that we do in Tableau. So we've got things such as the helper bar down the right-hand side. So this stony coloured section of the dashboard, all of our filters are always present on the right-hand side. And that for me is really important because it means instantly when a user accesses the dashboard, they immediately know where to go to be able to access the interactive side of it in terms of setting filters, highlighters, legends, and various things such as that. As I said, and I tweeted this earlier in the week, but actually one of the things that's really important for me is when there is interactivity on a dashboard, that we help users understand there's interactivity so they don't guess. So what we've done down here at the bottom is anywhere where there is an action on the dashboard, we have included a arrow legend that the users can instantly recognize as meaning an action is available. So if I drop back to our example dashboard, you can see here the red triangle and the gray triangle represents that there's a click action and a hover action. So a lot of the tips I'm going to be sharing with you tonight aren't rocket science. They're not kind of Zen level Tableau voodoo. They really are basic, simple techniques that are meant to add value to the user. And by us identifying there as an action really helps our users immediately know we can click on something and it drives further action on the dashboard. The other thing that that's really helped us do is transform the way we build our dashboards, because by encouraging people to use filter actions, it means we've been able to negate the constant business requests that we had before, which is our dashboards have to have 30 filters because I need to filter it by X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, and so on and so on. Actually, if we make our dashboards interactive, we can really tighten the number of filters available. And the other thing we've done from an end user perspective is we've put a little hover, so we've got a workbook icon, which is basically a sheet with a shape of a red eye. And then in the workbook sheet here, you hover it up and actually you get the background about the workbook. So if an end user wants to be able to understand what they're viewing, who to contact, where the data coming from, we moved away from having a separate sheet at the end of the dashboard, and actually it's embedded as a tooltip within every single worksheet, and it's always in the bottom right. So from an analyst point of view, I just wanted to share with you a couple of examples in our worksheet so you can understand how we've supported the analysts to be able to apply these viz standards on a regular basis. So firstly, as I said, containers are really important to us. It helps us structure and it helps us use a tiled layout. It means it renders properly on every single view that we've got. But actually, as I said, containers aren't the easiest thing for analysts to be able to get their head around. So an example of our community inspiration section, on the right-hand side here, you'll see that we've got a link to a number of community websites, blog posts, videos, that if the analyst picks up our viz standard and isn't sure how to do it, they instantly go to the right-hand side and they've got support that helps them in their journey in terms of bringing their skill set up. We also wanted to comply with the viz standards of the organization. So we are a real estate firm, so we have a paint swish. I think that's probably the right term. It's the technical one that I'm probably most unfamiliar with. We've got a paint swish at the top of the dashboard. That's our corporate kind of branding for headers. So we didn't want to be able to use floating in any aspect of our dashboard. So we used a little tip that I think can for large references a fair bit, which is if you use PowerPoint to create that, we save it as an image and then we embed it in the dashboard as a fixed image as opposed to a floating image with text on top. So just a really quick and easy way to make the appearance of a fixed dashboard, but actually in reality you could imagine it's floating, but it never is. We also use color palettes, so that's fairly generic, but that's taking the organization's color palette and we apply it in the viz standards. The thing that we do is encourage all of our analysts to put that in the preference file, so that when they drop it then on measures and dimensions, it automatically is available in their Tableau workbook. And if you want to reference in the Tableau community, there's numerous blog sites about how to update your Tableau preference file. And lastly, this is what the amazing kind of viz vocabulary section that Andy's given us looks like. So we talk about how to chart type deviation, and we apply the JLL colors. And then what an analyst can do is simply right-click the diverging bar chart, go to that sheet and reverse engineer for themselves how to do it. And that's a really great resource. And for us, it was really important to put that in the viz styles so that the analysts can get value to it. So then just to wrap up, so once we've applied the viz standards, how do we ensure consistency? So how do we ensure that, yes, all the analysts go, that's brilliant, but then the analysts, when they're busy, don't potentially just bypass it and go back to the old way of just getting data out and getting visits out that don't necessarily look consistent for them. So we hold an internal beta review. What happens is when a dashboard is ready for submission, the analysts upload it to a particular project on our server, so a beta project, and that has to be 24 hours in advance of any scheduled review. We hold a team review every Friday. It's an hour WebEx, and it is open to everyone in the team. And we actively encourage everyone in the team to participate. We don't want it to be a managerial kind of myself feeding back to the analysts. What we want to be is peer support and peer feedback, so we're growing together. So the analyst presents their dashboard. As a peer group, we then review it. We provide feedback, and then the analyst uses that feedback to refine the dashboard. And then once it's refined, we publish it to live and we release it once a fortnight in a release cycle, whereby we communicate that to our end users. The internal beta review is not about criticism. It's meant to be about support. I'm not sure my analysts quite believe that when the first viz review we did lasted an hour and a half and I gave them about 4 pages worth of feedback, but I did genuinely mean it in a lovely way. They probably wanted to kill me, but I'll accept that. So we try and ensure that they're adhering to the design standards. We try and ensure they're using appropriate use of chart types, but ultimately what comes back to all of this is, are we answering the right business questions? So are we encouraging insight? And just to end, we've been doing this process now for about 2 months, and it really has transformed the way that we approach designing dashboards. The team are now starting to work together. We've got real collaboration and we've got a real sense of pride. So every time we release a dashboard, I can look at the analysts and I know they're really proud in what they've released. But what really has come back to me from the analyst point of view is they are continuously learning. They are always learning new things, and because they're doing that because they're engaging with the Tableau community and with their peers. And from a user perspective, people are saying it's allowing them to move from hindsight into insight, and then eventually we really want to support them to move into foresight through things such as alerting and that advanced Tableau functionality. So that is kind of our process. We will be releasing our viz standards, so both the template and the 40-page guidance, on the JLL Tableau public profile. That's likely to be available very early in the new year, and we'll follow that up with some blog sites. But if you didn't have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me on Twitter or on my blog site, and I'm happy to answer any specific questions. So thank you very much for your time.
Simon, there was a question that popped in for you. Someone is asking, is there an example of what a peer review survey could look like?
I haven't got one that I can share on screen, so I probably need to sanitize it. That's not to say there's swear words in it and stuff, but just to make sure there's no business reference. So I will upload an example to the Tableau community page tomorrow as a static image. So if I'll do that for you tomorrow, and hopefully it'll be available to everyone.
Okay, great. Looks like there's another question coming in. For dashboard viz standards, do you have any recommended settings to fit every screen other than automatic dashboard size?
Yeah, so we use 1400 by 800 as our standard size. That's kind of going to a little bit of the lowest common denominator because we asked IT in terms of what everyone's resolutions are set to. We could have used automatic, but if I'm honest, we didn't have confidence that it would keep to our viz standards and it would keep that consistency. So we preferred to fix it at a size of 1400 by 800. The only thing we haven't done yet is approach mobile design, because we are waiting for the new version of Tableau to be installed on our server so we can see what the functionality that got announced at New Orleans, will hopefully allow us to do in terms of a mobile design.
Okay, great. And I can add that for our organization, we use 1150 by 850, sometimes 1200 by 850, but we don't use automatic sizing very often.
Thank you.
I don't see any, sorry, I don't see any other questions. So.
Okay.
I guess there were a couple, I answered a lot. This is Jeff. I answered most of my questions in text, but there's two that a lot of people asked. And so the charts that popped up in the tooltip, that's called Viz in Tooltip. And I don't claim to be an expert on it, but if you look up Viz in Tooltip Tableau, there's tons of stuff. And I don't know if there's anything on the case statement for column and row, but I'll send Simon and Nicole the link to the original video that I saw it in.
Thanks, Jeff.
That'd be great.
Cool. So I'm just aware we're overrunning slightly on time. So on behalf of Nicole and myself and all the presenters today, thank you so much for joining us. I think we just hit about 500 people at a peak. And I just wanted to end, obviously, it wouldn't be Christmas without a Die Hard reference. So sorry, but we just wanted to do a little bit of a play on the Die Hard 1 poster. Just to say, don't forget the festive movie. So the recording of today's user group will be available on the Tableau Healthcare Community Forums page this week, and people can then watch it back in their leisure. So thanks ever so much for joining us. Have a really good festive period, and we look forward to seeing you all and joining with you all in 2019.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.